Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by Smithville Fiber Internet, streaming TV, home security and automation in Southern Indiana. More information at smithville.com. Maller Grodner Attorneys, providing legal services to clients and the community. Understanding, expertise, results. Bloomington and Indianapolis. LawMG.com. IU Alumni Association, connecting IU's network of alumni and sharing the Indiana spirit through scholarships, advocacy, and volunteerism. Alumni.iu.edu. IU Center for Rural Engagement, extending IU Bloomington resources to improve Hoosier lives in partnership with communities and organizations. Rural.indiana.edu. And by WTIU members. Thank you.
Coming up on Indiana Newsdesk. New maps for Indiana's legislative districts were signed into law by the governor this week, but many complain about the lack of transparency in the process.
This is once again diluting the black and minority vote in another form of voter suppression.
The new maps are expected to only strengthen the GOP supermajority in the State House. U.S. Forestry personnel are combing through the Hoosier National Forest looking for non-native trees that need to be taken down.
The white pine's shading it out, and oak species need a certain amount of sunlight to be able to really survive.
But some worry that logging the area will upset a delicate balance. And we visit with an Indiana University Law School professor who has been investigating irregularities into the search process for new President Pamela Whitten. Those stories, plus the latest news headlines, right now on Indiana Newsdesk. Welcome to Indiana Newsdesk. I'm Joe Wren. Well, Indiana's 2021 redistricting process is officially over after Governor Eric Holcomb signed the bill creating new legislative districts into law this week. But as Indiana Public Broadcasting's Brandon Smith reports, some question the process and the end result.
The maps Republicans created for themselves over the past few weeks likely eliminate any competitive congressional districts and virtually guarantee the GOP will maintain or even grow its supermajorities in the State House and Senate. Governor Eric Holcomb, who did not publicly involve himself in the process, applauded lawmakers for being orderly and transparent. Many Hoosiers, however, argued the process wasn't transparent. They said there wasn't enough time after Republicans unveiled their maps for the public to fully understand and evaluate them. And they noted the only public hearings on the proposed districts were during the workday at the State House. George Washington University political scientist Christopher Warshaw says Republicans typically win about 60% of the votes statewide, but will likely win between 70 and 80% of the seats in the new maps.
We should aspire for more from our democracy. At the end of the day, this is one of the most extreme gerrymanders in history. And even though it could have been more extreme, that really doesn't take away from the extremity of this plan.
The new districts won't take effect until November 8th, 2022, Election Day. For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Brandon Smith at the State House.
And we're joined now by Vanessa Cruz Nichols, who's an associate professor of political science at Indiana University, for more about redistricting in Indiana. Hello, Professor. Thank you so much for being here. Gerrymandering has a long history in this country. Can you just talk a little bit about the history, and has it always been this partisan?
Yes, I'm happy to talk about that. I've been talking about this with my students for the past couple of weeks, and so it really, aligned with what was going on in real life in Indiana. And so this has been a practice, that's been especially predominant after 1810 or so. The infamous name gerrymandering comes from Governor Gerry from Massachusetts, who created a district that helped protect his seat, and it was shaped in such an odd way that it looked like a salamander. And so they combined the name Gerry and salamander, and we have gerrymandering. And so, it's become more and more partisan just because of the predominance of our two-party system and the prevalence and existing polarization that we have in our country. Redistricting and gerrymandering has not been the only contributor to that polarization, but that's something that has become. Politicians have become more technical and hired data scientists to create more favorable district lines for their communities. But but there are other states that are doing better jobs at, removing some of those partisan incentives. So it isn't the way it has to be.
Yeah. As we heard, Republicans get about 60% of the vote in Indiana, but with the maps will control about 70 to 80% of the seats. So what would it take for district maps to reflect the population?
Right. And so our district maps would have to be much more competitive. And so District 5, for example, would have been more competitive. It was a little less red, less deep red when we looked at previous maps. There are some great resources, where I've looked at these maps with my students through 538. And they're tracking all the new maps that are coming out from various states. But District 5 was very much much more competitive in the previous map than it is now. And so that has a lot to do with some of the natural geographic sorting that is happening in our country. And so it's also partially what is contributing to polarization. So more Republicans are tending to live more in the suburb and rural areas, and more Democrats are tending to live in more urban areas. But yeah, District 5 is definitely one of those examples where we're seeing just a much safer seat for red Republican candidates.
All right, Professor, thank you very much. We're out of time. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Take care.
Well, the Clay County Jail opponents say that's because of the jail's agreement to house federal inmates. Holden Absher reports.
The Clay County Sheriff's Office made an agreement with the U.S. Marshal Service to house Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, inmates in 2015. It is the only facility in Indiana with such an agreement. The jail opened in 2006 with 176 beds. As of Monday, 61 of the current 168 inmates are ICE detainees. Per its agreement, the jail makes $55 per day for each federal inmate. The proposed expansion would add more than 250 beds to the jail and more than double its size. Several members of the public opposed the expansion during Monday's county commissioners meeting. They said the jail is only full because of its agreement with the U.S. Marshals Service.
We don't stand for an addition to this jail, right? Because that means more individuals will be walking these halls of Clay County.
Catalan Rano's father was arrested in November 2017 for driving without a license. He was detained in the Clay County Jail for 1 month before being transported and eventually deported to Mexico 10 months later. She says a jail expansion in Clay County will allow more people to be detained by ICE for minor offenses.
It is a right to seek refuge. It is a right to come here and live our life respectfully as we want to.
Hannah Cartwright is executive director of Mariposa Legal in Indianapolis. During Monday's meeting, she said more than 78% of ICE detainees do not have a criminal history, and an expansion runs the risk of staining Clay County's reputation.
You're going to become known for that outside of your county. You're already known for that.
Commissioners did not vote on the expansion Monday. However, members of the public encouraged the board to host additional public hearings before moving forward in the agreement with the project developer. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Holden Absher.
Child welfare payment compliance rose in Monroe County during the pandemic. Benta Boutier reports the increase can be attributed in part to the federal government's decision to collect money people owed from their first stimulus check.
The increase in child support payments locally is part of a nationwide trend, says Monroe County's deputy prosecutor in charge of the child support program.
The overall collections in our cases are up. Obviously, every family circumstance is different, and there are cases where payments have gone down, where folks have lost jobs or whatever. But overall, our collections and distributions have actually been up over the last year.
$7.3 million was collected by the county's child support program in the 2020 fiscal year. That's up $800,000 from 2019. Clark says along with the money garnished from stimulus checks, unemployment benefits also helped increase compliance. Monroe County and many others did not charge anyone with a felony during the pandemic if they owed child support for several reasons.
One is obviously the uncertainty that folks have faced. Also, there have been several cases that may have otherwise qualified for a felony that now unemployment benefits are coming in, and so the folks have been paying for a substantial period of time, and so it no longer qualifies.
But Clark says her department will start charging people again in the next few months as work becomes more available and people can at least make part of a payment. She says those charged with a non-support felony have provided essentially no support for their child. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Benta Boutier.
Now, Clark says people can appeal the amount they are required to pay in child support directly to her office. Residents of Lake Village and environmental groups have won a lawsuit against the Army Corps of Engineers over a large organic dairy in Newton County. Indiana Public Broadcasting's Rebecca Thiel reports a federal court ruled that the agency didn't do a good job of investigating Natural Prairie Dairy for a wetland permit.
Natural Prairie Dairy is a confined animal feeding operation that sits on the now dried-up bed of Beaver Lake on the edge of the former Grand Kankakee Marsh, which used to be one of the country's largest inland wetlands. The Hoosier Environmental Council calls the area one of the most ecologically sensitive in the state. The group's attorney, Kim Ferraro, says Natural Prairie Dairy was only investigated for a federal wetland permit after it had already filled drainage ditches and done other work on the property. The court ruled that the Army Corps should have taken those changes into account.
The Army Corps has to essentially go back to the drawing table and do a proper wetland investigation.
Ferraro says if the agency finds that there are wetlands or waters that should be federally protected at the farm,
well, it just means that Natural Prairie went ahead and violated the Clean Water Act very clearly.
And that would give the plaintiffs ammo for their other pending lawsuit against the dairy itself. The farm wasn't able to comment in time for air. For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Rebecca Thiel.
Coming up next on Indiana Newsdesk, we talk with an Indiana University law professor whose investigation into the university's search process for a new president, Pam Whitten, has raised serious questions. And the U.S. Forestry Services is looking at ways to eliminate non-native trees from the Hoosier National Forest. But doing so could upset a delicate balance. These stories and more right here on Indiana Newsdesk.
Wake up.
Wake up to the world.
To the marvels. The mayhem.
The music.
Wake up to the wows. The woes.
The wonder.
Wake up to the commotion. To the beauty.
To the humanity.
To the hope. Wake up every morning, fully awake.
NPR Morning Edition.
Tune in to your local station or download the NPR app.
Year after year, PBS has been bringing you the news you trust.
We care about the things that are going to affect the lives of each and every American.
The in-depth analysis you need.
What we normally see in these big crises.
And the true stories that have to be told.
We're a place that people can come not just to find out what happened, but why it matters.
It's all thanks to the support of viewers like you. Thank you. And stay tuned to America's most trusted network.
Welcome back to Indiana Newsdesk. A tenured member of the Indiana University Law School faculty says the Board of Trustees ignored its own search committee recommendations in hiring Pamela Whitten as IU's president. Steve Sanders says his report is based on interviews with 8 people close to the search process. However, none of his sources are named in the story. Now, IU spokesman Chuck Carney says the university will not comment, but wants to make it clear that IU is committed to following all policies and laws to protect the integrity of personnel recruitment and hiring. We're joined now by Professor Steve Sanders, whose reporting on the story can be viewed at medium.com/@SteveSand. We'll have that online too, Steve. Okay. Thanks so much for being here. I guess first question is, what led to this investigation? Something clicked.
Yeah, almost immediately after President Whitten's appointment, I started hearing strange things from people about the search. I've been around IU for years, and you have sources and you pick up things. And I decided that the problem seemed serious enough that they deserved somebody who could investigate them in a systematic way. I was trained both as a journalist and then later as a scholar. I've been part of IU for 40 years. I think I probably had sources that no one else, that would not talk to anyone else. And so it just sort of evolved that I decided I would write what was a sort of combination of a piece of investigative journalism with the perspective and analysis of an academic article examining the search.
So what did you find?
What I found is that the search committee did what a search committee is supposed to do, that is to interview candidates, narrow down finalists. They sent a list of finalists to the Board of Trustees in January, and then for one reason or another, the trustees elected not to move forward with any of those finalists. Then instead, they hired a second search consultant and essentially struck out on their own at the 11th hour to look for a different candidate.
So you've also mentioned that there's a high-profile law firm requested some of your emails pertaining to your investigation into the search. Is this normal?
Well, I hope not.
Yeah.
At least if Indiana University is behind it. Indiana University has declined every possible opportunity I and others have given them to just deny that they know anything about this. Emails of university employees are public records, but I think most faculty would consider it a chill on their First Amendment rights and academic freedom if the university itself was seeking to intimidate a faculty member or seeking to find out how I knew what I knew. The search committee, they have targeted my communications with members of the search committee. That includes faculty as well as people outside the university. Those are the people who are supposed to help the trustees find a president. And I know that a good number of the search committee members are just unhappy with the process.
We have about 30 seconds left, but I did want to get to this payment to former President McRobbie for a little bit more than $500,000 that you came across.
Yeah, briefly what happened is the trustees got nervous the search would fail and that President McRobbie might need to stay in office for another 6 months. That turned out not to be necessary, but essentially, and I detail this in the story, what the trustees decided is they had basically a gentleman's agreement with McRobbie that they were going to honor anyway, since he had agreed to remain available if needed.
Steve, thank you so much for being here today. Of course, we have much more on this online.
My pleasure. Thank you, Joe.
The U.S. Forestry Service is evaluating several patches of land within the Hoosier National Forest to determine whether some of the trees need to be replaced. Adam Pinsker explains why this is a delicate process.
The Forestry Service says that climate change is one of the big reasons why they want to go ahead with this management plan here at Hoosier National Forest.
Hickory nuts. Over here we got pecans. This is our little orchard. We got peaches and pears.
Andy Mahler carved out his own slice of heaven on the edge of the Hoosier National Forest outside Paoli several years ago. But he worries about what this area may look like in the future.
People have been warning for over 30 years about the climate crisis that was coming, and sadly the climate crisis is no longer coming. It is upon us.
Mahler is concerned about what the Forest Service management plan may have in store for the area. The plan is broken down into different sections or areas of interest. Forest managers say there are several issues they're hoping to address.
Logging is a tool that we use in order to be able to meet those objectives. And we're looking at it for multi-diversity type use, and we're looking at it from an ecological standpoint. That's one of many tools that we could use.
And it's only a tool that can be applied to certain sections of the forest, such as Management Area 2.8, along a remote stretch of the park near Patoka Lake. Almost 100 years ago, farmers abandoned this land after it was ravaged by a drought. To fend off erosion at the time, forest managers reforested the area with non-native eastern white pine, which thrives on nutrient-poor soil. Now these trees are dying because they can't fully adapt to southern Indiana's climate.
You can see we have diseases attacking them. We have pine canker, which forms those scars like the one you see behind me.
Travis Swaim is a silviculturist, which means he studies trees, and says this section is a prime candidate for logging because the dying white pines are crowding out the native hardwoods.
This is a small white oak, likely came from an acorn on the large mature white oak right behind you there. And as you can see, it's growing right up under this non-native eastern white pine. The white pine's shading it out, and oak species need a certain amount of sunlight to be able to really survive.
Swaim says there is no lack of dying tree patches around the forest due to insect and disease issues as well.
I think some of this is probably climate change related. We're seeing pathogenic fungi attacking our trees, root diseases, essentially root rot.
25 cents per every 100 cubic foot of timber sales goes into the federal treasury, while the rest of the revenue is reinvested into the Hoosier National Forest. Money generated from timber sales can vary in amount depending on the types of trees and market conditions. There are natural barriers to management work inside Hoosier National Forest, including miles of cave systems like this area off the Springs Valley Trail.
We have large, mature, seed-producing oaks.
Further down the trail, Swaim shows us an area of the forest where he might recommend burning to thin out beech trees in the area and help make oak trees more competitive.
There's something like 350 species of Lepidoptera, like moth and butterfly alone, that prefer oak over other trees to have their cocoons to feed on.
But hardwood trees like ash and beech that would be burned are a favorite nesting place for bats. Indiana is home to a dozen species of bats. 2 of those species are on the federally endangered list, and 1 is listed on the state endangered species list.
You're cutting down the live trees, all the live trees in an area, or the dead trees. You're going to probably cut down a roost tree of one of these bats with a lot of females and pups in it. And when those trees hit the ground, typically the impact kills the pups and most of the mothers too.
Jeff Stant is executive director of the Indiana Forestry Alliance.
Indiana was in the heart of the largest temperate hardwood forest on the planet.
He has serious concerns about the management plan, beginning with the logging and burning. He worries it will leave too many oak trees and not enough other species of trees.
It's all of the species together that create the ecosystem, the community. And when you just cut all those other species out, you're only leaving the food sources for just the invertebrates that feed on oak hickory and the animals that feed on those invertebrates.
Stant says the forest turns over on its own when dead trees fall and knock over older trees, creating openings in the canopy. He worries removing too many trees will do more harm than good.
And the combination of removing the canopy, forest canopy over that much area and tearing up the ground is the recipe for invasive plants.
Swaim contends the Forest Service uses science-based methods like stocking tables, which recommends how many trees can exist within an acre without being overcrowded.
And there's basically one of these stocking tables for all the different forest types across the country. And we have one specific to our central hardwoods, our upland central hardwoods here in Indiana.
And Swaim adds that the Forestry Service wants to preserve and plant as many oak trees as possible because studies have shown those species can weather climate change.
We're seeing more extreme weather events, whether it's extreme rains or longer, hotter, drier summers.
The human experience throughout history is much deeper and richer.
Mahler says the more time he spends in the forest, the more he is able to think clearly about some of life's challenging questions. But if you ask him what should be done to protect the Hoosier National Forest, he will simply tell you,
the only way you can protect the land is by knowing it, loving it, and taking action to defend it.
The Forestry Service says it may not be until 2023 when this project actually begins. Public comment sessions may not happen right away because some forestry officials are out west battling wildfires out there. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Adam Pinsker.
As the temperature starts dropping, it's not only people in Bloomington putting on extra layers. Catherine Patterson reports on trees around town getting sweaters to bring awareness to Middleway House.
This past Friday was the beginning of Middleway House's Wrapped in Love public art display, and a celebration at the courthouse marked its 50th year of service in Monroe County. Between October and March, the trees will be wrapped in about 60 sweaters provided by 36 different artists. Each sweater includes Middleway House's crisis line number. Cindy Houston has worked at Middleway House for 34 years.
You think about all the families that we've served over the years and all the people who are living in peace and safety because Middleway was there.
Houston's work at Middleway was commemorated by the renaming of its shelter after her. Houston says she hopes one day they can close the shelter because every home is a safe one. Until then, she plans to continue working to help those in need. For more information about Wrapped in Love, Middleway House, and ways you can get involved in community service, visit middlewayhouse.org. For WTIU, I'm Catherine Patterson.
And the Indiana basketball teams welcomed back fans for the first time in more than a year and a half for Hoosier Hysteria. Pat Bean has the sights and sounds from the event.
part of is saying that you were at school when the journey started, and hopefully some of you will still be in school when the journey ends with a national championship.
That's the end of this program, but our work continues at WTIUnews.org. Have a great weekend.
Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by Smithville Fiber Internet, streaming TV, home security and automation in Southern Indiana. More information at smithville.com. Mallard Grodner Attorneys, providing legal services to clients and the community. Understanding, expertise, results. Bloomington and Indianapolis. LawMG.com. IU Alumni Association, connecting IU's network of alumni and sharing the Indiana spirit through scholarships, advocacy, and volunteerism. Alumni.iu.edu. IU Center for Rural Engagement, extending IU Bloomington resources to improve Hoosier lives in partnership with communities and organizations. Rural.indiana.edu. And by WTIU members. Thank you.